Recording, please. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judge Evan Jones. This is our reoccurring meeting of the pretrial processes work groups, part of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. Notice we have a smaller group than normal here today, so good afternoon to everyone. Alan, Kelsey, Jake, good afternoon. And as our agenda item today, we have Dr. Zachary Hamilton with us. So good afternoon, Dr. Hamilton.
Hello.
I appreciate your accepting the invitation to be with here with us here today. Just for, I guess, for Jake, you're probably the only one that doesn't know this, but Dr. Hamilton's been working on a project to validate the use of the PSA that we've been using out of pretrial services. And so he's kind enough to come today and just kind of informally walk us through the process of that project that he's working on. And so that's what we anticipate hearing. Is there, Alan, is there anything else that you've talked to Dr. Hamilton about?
No, we've communicated back and forth a couple times just about making sure I'm getting the right data and it's in a readable form for him. But other than that, I'll be hearing the same stuff that you guys will today.
Okay. Then I think we should just move right into that and have Dr. Hamilton walk us through the project he's working on.
Sure, I can do that. So, just to give you a little background about myself, I used to be a professor at Washington State University, and that seems like a long time ago. It wasn't that long ago. It was about 5 years ago. I was a professor there, and during that time, I worked with King County to help create and validate their risk assessment called the PRINS. I've been doing this for a fair amount of time. And part of the process of implementing any risk or needs assessment is really evaluating whether or not it's working for your population. And sometimes what you find is that tool that was advertised to be at a certain level might not be at that level when you implement it. And so adjustments or recalibration needs to take place to make sure that happens. But the first step is always to evaluate the tool. And one of the ways that we do that is by collecting your data of individuals that have been assessed on the tool. What we try to do is not just get their overall score, but to get their individual items as well. So one of the processes that we go through is we take that overall score and we see how well it predicts any of the outcomes that you're looking to predict. And as far as the PSA goes, there's three specific outcomes. One is whether or not they fail to appear after being assessed and released. The second is whether or not they have a new criminal action that's filed against them. And then the third is whether or not they have a new violent criminal action that's filed against them. So the tool itself, and any tool really, is designed to score so that higher scores indicate a higher likelihood of each one of those three types of outcomes. The way that this is assessed is through a statistic called an area under the curve statistic, which essentially says that if the tool identifies you as being high risk and you do commit one of these outcomes, then that's a correct answer. If it says that you're low risk and you do not commit one of those outcomes, then that's a correct answer. But if it says that you're high risk and you do not commit one of those outcomes, that's a wrong answer and that's considered a false positive. If you are identified as low risk and you do commit one of those outcomes, that's a false negative. And so what the AUC does is it essentially combines all four of those accurate and inaccurate results into one statistic. That statistic ranges from 0.5 to 1. 0.5 is essentially tantamount to flipping a coin. Heads, I think you're high risk. Tails, I think you're low risk. All the way up to 1, which is perfect prediction. And there's certain standards that have been set within the field to identify how high that AUC should be in order to say that your tool's working and functioning the way that it should be. And so there's been a little bit of work done on this recently, but essentially AUCs between sort of that 0.5, which is that coin flip, to 5.5 is considered negligible. Anything between 5.5 and sorry, anything between 5.5 and 6.4 is considered moderate, and anything above between is sorry, 0 to 5.5 is negligible. 5.6 to 6.4 is considered small. 6.4 to 7.1 is considered moderate, and then anything 7.1 and above is considered strong. That's a lot of details, but essentially, what we're going to do is take your scores and see whether or not the AUC holds or identifies how accurate that tool is, and that's really the basic statistic that we use. One of the ways that we also examine a tool is based on the cut points or the risk level categories that it provides. So within the PSA, you've got a low, moderate, and a high risk category, and you have those particular thresholds or scores that determine how somebody goes from the low to the moderate to the high risk. And then eventually, if you're looking at that outcome for new criminal violent action or new violent criminal action, that's sort of an extra indicator or a flag to say whether or not that person's high risk for that particular outcome. What we'll do with those categories is make sure that each one of the successive categories, so going from low to moderate and high, has an increasing rate of those outcomes. So you should see your lowest amount of FTAs and new criminal actions in your low risk group, slightly more in your moderate, slightly more in your high risk group. Tools that aren't functioning well, you won't see that sort of incline, or you might see that two groups are really close to one another, and so the distinction between low or moderate, or the distinction between moderate or high, isn't really providing, any sort of discrimination between those two groups. The last thing that we do is we try to examine whether or not the tool is functioning equally well for all groups. One of the concerns that's happened within the last, I'd say, about 10 years, is that assessment tools are typically built on what's called the development population. So you have your original population that you create that tool from, and then once that tool is created, people adopt it. So your tool, the PSA, was created on a primarily Kentucky sample, and then it was adopted by a lot of different states. The distinctions that we've found is that as those tools are adopted, if the population they're adopted by doesn't look like the population that it was created for, or that development population, there can be some variations or some biases that are populating that tool. So what we see a lot of times is that there's been a fair amount of tools within the last 40 years that were originally made in Canada and originally made with predominantly white male populations. And so when we take those tools and bring them down to the United States and work them into populations that are less white and less male, they tend to not work as well as they did for that original development population. So what we have to do is we have to look at your assessment and identify whether or not there's bias within the prediction. So if I have a score of 10, does that score predict equally well for individuals that are white versus individuals that are black? Does it predict equally as well for individuals that are male versus those that identify as being female? And so a lot of what we'll do is, look at that continuous risk score. We'll look at those risk level categories to see that they're working properly. And then we look for bias to see if that's anywhere within your tool or anything to be concerned with. If we do find issues with the tool at all, this is why we've collected individual information on those items, not just the summary score, but the individual level data, where we'll be able to potentially look a little bit deeper and figure out if there's particular items that are difficult to score, or you're having problems getting consistent answers, or really just there's some items that don't really work for your population. And so getting at that additional level of detail is sort of as needed, but we have that information if the results draw us towards that conclusion. I've been talking for a while, and typically I'll do that because I'm a professor unless someone stops me. So I'll stop there and I'll let you all ask some questions.
I have
If
that
you have
same problem, Dr. Hamilton, as a judge. I just tend to talk. No, I thought that was a helpful description. That was what I was hoping you could provide for me, because I hadn't really heard how it was all working. So I appreciate that. I did have one question. The success rates that you're calculating, so you know the based on new failures to appear, new criminal actions, or new violent criminal actions, you're looking at that. Is there a particular time frame that's associated with when those new events either occur or don't occur? That, and it,
It's what we do is we evaluate that the duration of time between the individual's release and then any sort of resolution
okay,
to that case. So if the case gets disposed of, if it gets dismissed, if the person gets adjudicated, then that stops the clock. If the person's never released and they're detained, then they can't be included in our evaluation because they can't commit those outcomes. So essentially, the assessment of a this is a really good question, by the way. The assessment of a pretrial risk assessment, like the PSA, is different from, say, one you might use for the Department of Corrections, in that there's no fixed time point that you necessarily have to use, because everybody's duration of release is going to be slightly different. So we can set a duration, but typically what we use are what are called survival models, which essentially and they were developed in sort of the medical sciences when they were testing out drugs to say, if I give you this drug, do you survive longer? Knowing that everybody eventually dies, but does the drug prolong your life that much further? Well, what we do is we take that to the PSA and we identify, does an individual who's low risk end up not committing those events for longer periods of time? Does an individual that's high risk not only commit those outcomes, but do they commit them quicker? So we can use those survival models to essentially track those different durations of time that people are observed in the community.
okay, that makes sense to me. So I'm help me understand it if you could a little bit. So, you know, one of the problems we have here in Whatcom County is some of our cases in Superior Court are pending or active before resolution longer than they should be, right? So we have cases of people that are on pretrial services, say, or, you know, under conditions of the court, obligations to appear, obligations to not commit new crimes for a long period of time. And so I'm just wondering, is there some control within the study that accounts for that they are, you know, they're kind of up against those conditions. We're watching them for longer as to whether they're going to fail to appear or commit new crimes.
Well, the duration of time that they're in the community and their case has not been resolved, that's accounted for. So if you're staying out longer and longer and longer and you haven't committed those outcomes, then that's a good outcome for you. If an individual, say, is only in the community for 2 weeks and they don't commit any of those outcomes versus somebody that's in the community for, let's say, 9 months and they don't commit those outcomes, the 9 month duration is going to weight more within that model than the one that's only there for 2 weeks. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It makes sense to me. The I guess I had another question too. I think I don't have the PSA in front of me, but I recall that it specifies risk categories specific or risk that's specific to either a failure to appear or risk that's specific to new crimes. Am I right about that, Alan? Am I
Yeah, are you rephrase the question? I'm sorry, you said that
doesn't our PSA give a risk score or a risk level associated with each of those categories, the failure to appear category and the new crime category that's different?
it kind of gives a summary in the end. So it'll take all 9 answers or 10, 11 answers in total. And then it'll classify them in low, medium, or high
Okay.
on the
That,
matrix.
that takes into consideration both failure to appear category and the new crime category.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
that
wrong.
happens behind the scenes, you know, in the how the developer made the tool. I don't see how that's weighted. I don't know if Dr. Hamilton has kind of seen how that algorithm works, but that's what
I have.
okay.
Yeah, it's in publication. It's open to the public.
Okay.
I'm happy to share that stuff with you too, if you'd like.
I don't know if I would even understand what I'm looking at, to be honest, but it'd be interesting.
Essentially, there's within all of the items that you have, there's certain items that score towards predicting new criminal actions, and there's certain items that score towards predicting failure to appear. Some items score for both.
Yeah.
But essentially you arrive at two separate scores. And so you could be identified as having, a score of 6 for failure to appear and a score of 5 for new criminal action. And what the PSA does is it combines those two things together and it says, well, the failure to appear said that you're moderate, but the new criminal action said that you're low. So we're going to go with the higher one and say that you're moderate. But the scores themselves are sort of independent, and then they get the sort of, I believe they're hierarchical in nature, in which it takes the top category score. So it takes whichever one's higher and says that's what category you fall into.
Okay. Great. Anybody else have questions for Dr. Hamilton?
No, you summarized it really well. Thank you.
Yeah.
No problem. That's my job. But if there are other questions, if I, got too far into the weeds or there's some other things that come up, I'm happy to jump on again at any other time and clarify.
Sure. I appreciate it. Appreciate you being here.
Can I just ask real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you? Maybe I missed this. I understood you're a professor. Are you currently with AOC, or is this independent or?
No. I am a professor at the University of Nebraska, Omaha.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
Andrew Peterson, I think, is who you've been working with from the AOC. And he and I go way back from when I used to work at Washington State. So
Okay.
I think he referred me to you or the other way around. So that's kind of how we got connected.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Dr. Hamilton's project is one of the things we're working on with some funds through the AOC, through an AOC grant, the AOC grant. So it's separate but connected in that way too. All right, great. I have nothing further on the agenda. So does anybody have anything that needs to be, Alan, did you want to talk about your statistics or did you have anything else?
Didn't need to. It's pretty much status quo. We're still I have the only thing new I suppose would be I'm going to the AOC kind of the year wrap up of their grant thing this next Monday and Tuesday, where we'll present on what we've done with the office, what our initial goal was, where we landed, trouble along the way, things like that. So that's coming up on Monday and Tuesday. So next month, or when we do this in a couple months, I'll be able to report out kind of how that went. But other than that, there's nothing really to update here.
Great. All right. The other thing I've done is I asked Jill to put on the agenda for our next meeting a discussion about kind of the future of this work group, and the idea has been broached that maybe we collapse this work group back into the justice and legal subcommittee, and create ourselves as just an agenda item within that larger group. Maybe a more efficient use of all of our time. So we're thinking about that, but we're going to discuss that at the next meeting. All right. I think that is everything then. So we can close the meeting. Jill, anything else we need to?
We do have one attendee today. Kelsey, if you want to speak to the work group, please virtually raise your hand. And her hand is not raised. So that's all I have. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.